In 1931, Winston Churchill wrote an essay called 50 Years Hence. In it, he predicts genetic engineering, nuclear power, cellular telephony, and even clean or cultured meat, that is, growing real meat without the animals. And in the second part of the essay, he talks about how because the pace of technological change is advancing so rapidly, it's more important than ever that we take a principled approach to our work, because otherwise we might be accelerating in the wrong direction. This was a call to arms, but not one of Winston's normal calls to fight the Nazis. Rather, this was a call to use deep technology to solve the world's biggest problems. And while the rhetoric might not soar as high as Winston's speech during World War II in the House of Commons, where he said, "We shall fight till the end. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." This essay is even more inspiring, because in the modern age, the biggest threats aren't our enemies on the battlefield, but things like disease, malnutrition, and climate change. This is a graphical representation of the number of people that die in the modern age from war. Proportionally represented, this is the number of people that die from murder, that die from transportation accidents, musculoskeletal disorders, diabetes, non-transport accidents, infections, kidney disorders, digestive disorders, nervous system disorders, respiratory disorders, cancer, and heart and circulatory disorders. This is a comparison just of the number of people that die from heart and circulatory disorders in the modern age and that die from murder and war. But I want you to ask yourself, what do you hear about more on the news? Heart and circulatory disorders or murder and war? It used to make sense to focus more on things like murder and war because those were things we could at least do something about, whereas a lot of these other problems weren't. But times have changed. Using deep technology, we can now solve a lot of the world's biggest problems. Now is the time to fulfill Winston's vision in 50 years hence. That's why, with my co-founder Ella Made, we founded 50 Years. 50 Years is an early-stage venture capital fund based in Silicon Valley. We invest in companies that are using deep technology to build billion-dollar businesses that are also addressing massive social or environmental problems. We believe not only that business should be about solving big problems in the world, but we believe that businesses that do will outperform others on a purely financial basis. In fact, we believe this transition will be as impactful as the transition from the desktop to the cloud or from web to mobile. We think the next big transition in business is from a profit-only model to a profit plus impact model. Now, there's a lot of data to support this thesis, and I only have a little time, so I'm going to focus only on one of the core drivers of this trend: millennial attitudes toward business. I think it's fair to say that millennials aren't happy with the way business is being conducted. Deloitte did a study of 7,700 millennials across 29 countries. And one of the questions it asked them was an open-ended question: what is the purpose of business? And a plurality of millennials, 47%, said that the purpose of business was to improve society or protect the environment. More millennials answered this than said anything about making money. Now, millennials also think business should make money, but they think this is the true purpose. In that same survey, 87% of millennials said that the success of a business should be measured in more than just its financial performance. But 54% of those millennials thought that business only cared about financial returns. What does this mean? It means millennials are not happy and they're planning on leaving. In that survey, 25% of millennials said they were planning on leaving their place of work in the next year, 44% in the next 2 years, and 66% in the next 4 years. And it wasn't just junior employees. 57% of senior millennials, people in C-level or higher, planned on leaving within 4 years. Those of you that have built businesses or have invested in businesses or support businesses know you cannot build a sustainable, profitable organization if your talent is planning on leaving in these numbers. And it's not just sort of the goody two-shoes millennials. Net Impact did a study of MBA graduates, the most money-grubbing people in society, and found that 83% of them would take a 15% pay cut to work for a company that had positive social or environmental ends. And to put this number in perspective, 9 years ago, this number was 26%. And 4 years before that, it was 15%. 15, 26, 83. This is a significant and sustained trend. Now, there's a lot more data to support this thesis, but again, I only have a little time. So next, I'm going to talk about what's next. So a lot of people say, okay, I'm sold, I'm in, I'm convinced, now what? How do I use business to both make money and solve big problems? There are two questions that people typically get stuck on. One, what are the world's biggest problems? And two, how do I craft technology solutions that can both solve them and make money at the same time? So I'm going to walk you through a framework that we use at 50 Years to figure out what the big problems are, and then go through some examples that can help guide you on how to create these solutions. So the first issue is that there are a lot of problems in the world. Which ones are the most important? At 50 Years, we started to categorize the world's biggest problems ourselves and found that this was a really, really hard task. And then at some point, we realized that an organization had spent millions of dollars in many years and gotten many smart people together to do exactly this, to categorize the world's biggest problems. I'm talking about the United Nations. And they put them all into a list called the Sustainable Development Goals. This is essentially the UN's categorization of what the world's biggest problems are. Now, the list is by no means perfect. There are some big things that we wish were on here that aren't. There are some small details that maybe we don't think qualify as the biggest problems in the world. But it's a really good place to start to get everyone on the same page of what the biggest problems are. And it's particularly useful because it not only gives you high-level goals, but it breaks them down. So for instance, this is the SDG number 2, zero hunger. You can see on the high level, it's about eliminating hunger and malnutrition by 2030, but then it also breaks it down into very specific goals. So on the right, you can see one of the metrics is reducing the rate of stunting in children under 5. If you're looking to craft a technological solution to a big problem, these sub-targets are a really good place to start. Okay, so now we have our list of problems. How do we find solutions? At 50 Years, we like solutions that not only can help solve the problem, but also generate potentially $1 billion a year in revenue. That's no easy task. Well, I'm a chess player. This is me playing world chess champion Magnus Carlsen. For those of you that are curious, I did beat Magnus Carlsen at ping pong. He then beat me in this chess game. One of the key attributes of a great chess player is something called pattern recognition. And pattern recognition in chess is developed by studying the moves of players who play very well. So we're going to do something similar to help figure out a pattern recognition for these great solutions. We're going to look at some examples of companies that are solving these problems from the 50 Years portfolio. And we're just going to start with a single big SDG. It's an important one, climate change. Now, we all know that fossil fuels and the burning of them contribute tremendously towards climate change, and hence things like renewable energy, solar, wind, hydro are great solutions. But those are the obvious solutions. I want to talk about some non-obvious solutions to this problem. The first solution I want to talk about is a company called Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats makes real meat by farming cells directly instead of farming animals. So the first question you might have is, why would anyone want to do that? Sounds strange. Well, turns out animal agriculture contributes more to greenhouse gas emissions than all of transportation combined. On top of that, factory farms have really reached the limits of scale and are still failing to provide the world with the cheap, affordable nutrition it wants. Because animals on these farms are crammed so close together, they pump them full of antibiotics to make sure they don't get sick, which is a perfect breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microbes, which then often spread to humans. And of course, this is all particularly crappy to the animals. So by growing meat directly, by replicating the same biological processes happening inside the animal, just outside the animal, Memphis Meats is able to make people the real meat they want without any of the problems. This is a picture of their southern fried chicken, which I tried. It's delicious. I also had their duck à l'orange. And what's interesting is they're not only addressing the climate SDG. By enabling affordable production of healthy protein, they're addressing SDG number 2, zero hunger. By potentially making meat that is even healthier for the human body than conventional meat, the CEOs are cardiologists, they're addressing SDG number 3. By enabling cities to take control over their meat production and no longer be reliant on rural areas, they're helping with SDG number 11. By eliminating many of the inputs that go into animal agriculture, they're contributing to SDG number 12. A couple months ago, I was talking to Richard Branson, and one of his biggest passions in life is ending deforestation. And he invested in Memphis Meats because animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to deforestation. And because Memphis Meats can make meat without the animals, this helps his cause, SDG number 15. Now, Memphis Meats is certainly interesting, but they're one part of a broader category of companies that are solving this problem in similar ways, called cellular agriculture companies. The basic premise of cellular agriculture is that we're using animals to turn plant protein inputs, things that they eat, into outputs that we like to eat, drink, or wear, things like milk, meat, leather. All these companies are asking the same question. What if we just used biology directly to create these same products? Then we wouldn't need the animals. I'm going to go through a couple other examples so you see what I'm talking about. This is a company called Geltor. Geltor makes gelatin recombinantly by engineering cells that just crank it out. And for those of you that don't know, gelatin right now is made by taking the remains of a slaughtered animal, throwing it all into a giant acid vat. The bones sink to the bottom, the hair dissolves in the acid, and the middle layer, after a couple weeks, is extracted and put into things like gummy bears and marshmallows. Delicious. Geltor just engineers cells that crank it out. And it's interesting not only because it eliminates the need for animal agriculture, but it's also better for the consumers of gelatin. Customers who make things like gummy bears, if they want gelatin that has a certain consistency, that's chewy to a certain degree, they literally say, give me gelatin from a batch of old goats. In 2018, we're talking about sending people to Mars, cars that drive themselves, artificial intelligence, and we still have cutting-edge technology being, give me gelatin from old goats, throw them into a giant acid vat. That's insane. Geltor is going to change all that. This company is called Vitro Labs. Like Memphis Meats, Vitro Labs is growing real leather without the animals. They start by taking stem cells from an animal. They then differentiate those stem cells into skin cells, and then they grow them in an environment where the top layer and the bottom layer are different, a lot like how skin grows in an animal. They can then take that leather that they grow and tan it and turn it into products. Their technology has been demonstrated to work for cow, for ostrich, even for alligator. This company I unfortunately can't name quite yet because they haven't announced that they've raised funding, but they express milk proteins in plants. There has been an explosion in the popularity of non-dairy milks over the last decade. But people aren't fully satisfied because these plant-based milks don't taste quite as good as milk and they don't have the same functional properties. By engineering soy to express milk proteins, this company will enable plant-based milks to have the same taste and functional properties as real milk. Now, these are all our portfolio companies, but there are also companies not in our portfolio doing this for things like fish, eggs, silk, and even rhino horns, using biology directly to make these products. So cellular agriculture is super cool and a great way of addressing this problem, but we shouldn't forget also about just plants. A plant-based diet is one of the most environmentally friendly things you can do. It's also, by the way, really good for your health. But there's a problem in the plant-based meat industry, and it's that the cost of plant-based meats are higher than of conventional meat. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that the level of industrial automation in the conventional meat space is incredibly high. It rivals the automotive industry. You have animals going into a plant processing facility. You have robotic arms that are moving them around, computer vision to figure out what's going on. They're all skinned and chopped up, all by robots. This leads to very high efficiency and hence very low costs. Compared to that, the processing in the plant-based meat industry is stuck in the 50s. This is the problem that Seattle Food Tech is solving. Seattle Food Tech was founded by a Boeing engineer. She managed a team of 30 mechanical engineers designing the Boeing 777, and she's basically building the industrial automation for the plant-based meat processing industry. She's starting off testing the equipment by building her own chicken nuggets, which you can see here. They're also quite delicious. And by enabling the same level of automation in the plant-based meat industry as in the conventional meat industry, she'll drive down the cost. So we live in very exciting times. It is now possible to solve some of the world's biggest problems using deep technology. Now is the time to fulfill Winston's vision in 50 years hence, but it's not going to happen on its own. I hope all of you help in contributing to solving these big problems. Let's get to work. Thanks.